When the embryo is 1 week old, it has two layers of cells, a dorsal or outer epiblast layer and a ventral or inner hypoblast layer. During week 3 of development, the embryo undergoes gastrulation, where the cells in the epiblast layer form a 3-layered trilaminar disc with an ectoderm, mesoderm, and endoderm layer. So imagine an embryo like a birthday cake, with the ectoderm as the candles, the mesoderm as the frosting, and the delicious cake as the endoderm. We can put 3 candles on this cake to help you remember gastrulation happens during week 3. Around day 17, a group of mesoderm cells form a solid rod of cells, kind of like the shaft on an arrow, and this structure is called the notochord. The notochord is a transient embryonic structure, meaning that it doesn't actually exist as a structure in the adult. In fact, the only remnant adults have of the notochord is that it contributes to the nucleus pulposus, which is the jelly-like center of the intervertebral discs. Nevertheless, the notochord is extremely important during early development for a couple of reasons. First, the notochord is a solid structure that helps influence how the embryo folds early on. Second, the cells of the notochord secrete a protein called sonic hedgehog, or SHH for short, which diffuses out through the trilaminar disc. The closer a cell is to the notochord, the higher the concentration of sonic hedgehog. So it's a way for all of the cells to know where they are in 3-dimensional space. And this helps the surrounding tissues differentiate and develop in the right way. On day 20, mesoderm cells around the notochord differentiate into 3 specialized types of mesoderm, called the paraxial mesoderm, intermediate mesoderm, and lateral plate mesoderm, each of which goes on to make different tissues and organs. The paraxial mesoderm is the closest to the notochord, and it quickly starts to segment into paired blocks of tissue called somites, with each somite in the pair sitting right alongside the notochord and the neural tube above it. About 3 pairs of somites form per day, and like rings in a tree trunk, the number of somite pairs can be used to determine the age of the embryo. They develop in a cranial to caudal direction, in other words, from head to tail. By the end of week 5, there are between 42 and 44 pairs of somites in total. And the somites further divide into 3 regions: the sclerotome, which eventually gives rise to the bones and cartilage, the myotome, which gives rise to the muscles, and the dermatome, which gives rise to the dermis layer of the skin. To help you remember the tissues that derive from the paraxial mesoderm, or somites, think back to the frosting on our birthday cake, which represents the mesoderm layer. Imagine an old man trying his hardest to open a can of lime frosting that's closed so tight, kind of like somite. He tries so hard that his skin rips, representing the dermis layer. And then his muscles get sore, and his bones start aching. But that lid just won't budge an inch. Alright, so the next type is the intermediate mesoderm, and it's a bit thinner and is located just lateral to the somites. It gives rise to the adrenal cortex and the urogenital structures, like the kidneys, as well as reproductive organs like the testes and ovaries. To continue on with our tale, the old man keeps straining to open the frosting can, and immediately, for intermediate, starts jumping up and down on it. His adrenaline starts pumping, for the adrenal glands, and he gets a bit sexually aroused, for the gonads. And in the end, he strains so hard that he ends up peeing his pants, which is in reference to the kidneys. Now, the final layer is the lateral plate mesoderm, and it's the thinnest and most lateral of the 3 types. Around week 3 of development, the lateral plate mesoderm splits into a dorsal portion called the somatic or parietal mesoderm, which adheres to the ectoderm, and a ventral portion called the splanchnic or visceral mesoderm, which adheres to the endoderm. The space between the split is called the intraembryonic coelom, or intraembryonic cavity, and this space eventually becomes the thoracic and abdominal cavity. The parietal mesoderm goes on to become the serous membrane that covers these 2 cavities, what we call the parietal pleura, as well as the soft tissues of the arms and legs. Meanwhile, the visceral mesoderm goes on to become the serous membrane that covers the various organs, what we call the visceral pleura, as well as giving rise to the muscular wall of the gut and the heart and circulatory system. To remember this, let's go back to our old man with the frosting can. Due to the adrenaline and sexual arousal, he ends up lateral, meaning flat, on the ground because he suffers a massive heart attack for the circulatory system, and he ends up in a body bag for serous membranes, with an arm and a leg sticking out for limb development. And it's full of poop because his gut muscles collapse. Alright, as a quick recap, the mesoderm first gives rise to the notochord, which helps nearby cells orient themselves in a three-dimensional space. The nearby mesoderm starts to organize into three layers: the paraxial mesoderm, which turns into pairs of somites, which give rise to skin, muscle, and bony tissue; the intermediate mesoderm, which gives rise to the adrenal tissue, gonads, and kidneys; and the lateral plate mesoderm, which gives rise to serous membranes, limb tissue, and the heart and circulatory system.